It's about having a dream, having the passion for it, and finding, being really scrappy and fighting for it.
If you're creating something that you yourself are not passionate about, a product for someone else who might be useful, but you're like, I wouldn't use it myself. I don't think you're going to put in the effort, the time, the emotion.
My generation has screwed it up for the younger generation because we have not acted like responsible adults. We have not been the adults in the room.
You're definitely the adult that we want to look up to and that we trust. So
I would go out of my way, to show them everything, to prove that things were better than they actually were.
do you think that having a tunnel vision at the beginning of your journey has helped you or maybe kind of limited you in certain ways?
You don't have to beat your chest every day and say, I'm Armenian, I'm patriotic. You just live.
Well, welcome, Maria. Thank you so much for joining me today. I am super grateful, first of all, for the time that you're sharing with me and also for the work that you're doing. It takes guts, a lot of hard work to do it. And so I appreciate what you do every single day.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be with you.
So I actually, in the summer when I was in Yerevan, I actually met with Nishda Tsadurian because I've recently started the podcast and I'm figuring things out. And I've been asking him a lot of questions about how I can do it. So what I'm trying to say is that I admire the work that you do and I strive to that level as well. So I think we all need some standards, especially working for Armenia and in Armenia, to look up to and then to aim higher.
Well, I appreciate that very much. It makes all of the hard work worthwhile when you hear people appreciate the work that you do. So thank you for that.
So I know you've shared a lot in your interviews the story of moving to Armenia from Canada. I think like it's everywhere. Everyone knows it. But I don't think I have heard about your story when you were in Canada. I mean, what was your life like then? And then how has that changed as you moved to Yerevan?
Well, thank you because yeah, I'm tired of telling my story, to be honest. We were a curiosity when we first moved to Armenia because very few families had moved here from North America, especially. So yeah, I've retold that story. I feel like a broken record. Canada. So we moved. I was born in Beirut, but we moved to Canada in 1968. My parents had no money, very little education. They were children of survivors of the Armenian genocide. So my mother was pulled out of school in grade 3 to take care of her younger siblings. My father went to grade 9. So they moved to Canada, no money, no prospects, didn't know the language. Um, so it was a struggle for sure. And we were considered to be one of the early Armenians, if you will, because Toronto at that time had very little Armenians.
Yeah.
So yeah, I went to public schools my whole life. I didn't go to Armenian school. We didn't have an Armenian school at the time. Um, I don't know, just when I was 13, I started going to the Armenian Community Center and I got very involved with Armenian issues. And I always felt like a fish out of water in Toronto. I would look at the pictures of my parents in the 50s and 60s in Beirut and think, oh, why did you move us here? Beirut looked so intoxicating almost.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful time with my mother's, beehive hairstyle and jewelry and shoes and everything. Um, so yeah, I was very involved in the Armenian community. I met my husband there. I was going to a university. I went to university, got married, had a few children, but we were working. And then, of course, Armenia became independent in 1991, and I just felt like it was such an opportunity to go and explore and return to the homeland, if you will. Although, my father was from Musadal and my mom was from Marash, but at the same time, it was a homeland that we had dreamed about. So, yeah, Canada was, it's a great country. It gave me a lot of opportunities. My entire family is still there. But life was rather how do I put it without sounding? It was rather boring at the same time. I always say it's a great country, but there wasn't a lot to achieve or accomplish because all of that had been accomplished uh, by the time we were of age to do anything. So yeah.
Yeah, interesting. You know what I've noticed? As I moved to the States in 2018, and I've met a lot of Armenians here, the diaspora and Armenians, so to say, that we have this division, right? Diasporan and non-diasporan. But what I've noticed is that all of the kids who grew up here, they have this sense of patriotism that I haven't seen in those people who were born in Armenia. Well, I'm born in Yerevan. I was born and raised in Yerevan, and I don't think I have the same sense of I have to do something for my country as people do here. And it almost seems like the people who were born and raised here, they have this sense of calling, like as if the land is calling them back. And then there's a controversy. People who live in Armenia, it seems like they all want to leave Armenia. So it's just like, the push and pull between our Haydenic. Have you noticed that? And I mean, obviously there are reasons and we all know what the reasons are, but have you noticed this and was that the case for you too?
I don't subscribe to that as much anymore, especially after the war.
Yeah.
To say that the diasporans are more patriotic than the Armenians living here. I mean, what is patriotism, right? Look, I'll try to go back a little bit to come forward. So when I first moved to Armenia in 2001, I was so desperate to have my friends and family back in Canada or anybody that I came across, diasporan, visiting Armenia, to love Armenia the way I loved it. So I would
Mm.
go out of my way, to show them everything, to prove that things were better than they actually were, because in the early 2000s, things were not good. Um, I mean, but it's all relative. What do you mean by good, right?
Right.
Um, and then I got to a point where I said, I don't have to prove anything to anybody. They either love it or they don't, and it's a decision that they have to make. So whether they want to come and visit, whether they want to repatriate or move here for, a short period of time, it's up to them.
Yeah.
And then every time I would come across an Armenian from Armenia who wanted to leave, it was devastating for me. I was like, why are you leaving? I know what it's like in North America. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunities, but there's also a lot of problems there too. Yeah, you make your life where you should, where you were born, because you've had that luxury of being born in your homeland. And of course, I was speaking from a position of privilege, so it was very easy for me to say, oh, don't leave. When I, just to be very clear, I didn't come with lots of money and I wasn't rich. We sold everything that we had in Canada to be able to come and, have a house here and start a life here. So I acknowledge that privilege. So it was very easy for me to say, oh, don't go. Now, 23 years on, after experiencing the war and the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh, people here, they might drive by Mount Ararat and not pay attention to it. Although every day, if it's a beautiful, vision of it, we will discuss it. Um, but it's just part of their lives. For the Armenian living in the diaspora, if we're talking about the old diaspora, um, you know, Armenia for them was this dream, this fantasy, right? Their grandmother's Armenia, what they had hoped Armenia would be. It's easy to be very patriotic, but it's hard to live in the homeland. It's hard every day to face the challenges. It's hard to know that at any moment we can be attacked. It's hard to know that our borders are not secure. It's hard to know that you might not be able to put food on the table, right?
Exactly.
That's hard. But if you stay, you don't have to beat your chest every day and say, I'm Armenian, I'm patriotic. You just live. And that's what Armenia gave to me. I always say it, and I will say it till, my last breath. This land has been very kind to me and my family in many ways, but it's what you make of it. So, but of course, Armenia diaspora relations, we can talk about it till we're blue in the face. Um, it's really difficult. And patriotism is how you view your own identity as well.
Yeah.
I think so. in search of that identity. I know I'm from the diaspora, right? So I also know what it meant to dream and to want and to yearn, to be part of the nation building process. And I gave myself the gift of doing that. It wasn't easy, but it's certainly something that um, every day I wake up and I'm thankful for being here every day.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think what I'm taking from this, it's super important not to judge the people's situation by what their decisions are, because I know my parents have struggled to find a job since 20 years after the Soviet Union. And it was so hard that I was growing up with a mentality of you need to get out of this place so that you can live, so that you can find a job. And so that was like a survival instinct almost that worked in me.
No, absolutely, I understand. But I think right now, even with everything that we've experienced, with
Yeah.
the devastation of the war and the loss of Artsakh, again, maybe I'm saying things that other people have said or I've said over and over again. After the war, a lot of us, I think many of us or all of us, came to the realization that we had to work harder, that we had to be better and smarter and more strategic. We could no longer depend on the mythology that we had created around who we were and what we had accomplished. But today, I'm not saying it's easy. It's not easy anywhere. I mean, you had to start your new life in North America,
Yeah.
only what, 6 years ago. It is possible to create things in Armenia. It is
Yeah.
possible. And it's not always about money. Really,
Yeah.
it isn't. It's about having a dream, having the passion for it, and finding, being really scrappy and fighting for it.
No, I agree. I think it's going to take more than just this intellectual shift and understanding and perceiving it. I think it's more of an on a visceral level, because for me, I intellectually understand that I can go back to Armenia and I can start creating something there, but it's more of a something that sits more deeper in my psyche that kind of is there's a lot of controversial conversations, let's just put it that way, in my head going on.
Let me also say, Lucy, that look, not everybody has to come to Armenia and live here.
Right.
The work that the diaspora does is invaluable. Every individual Armenian doing whatever it is that they're doing, just living in whatever country that they're living in, when it comes time to supporting Armenia, maybe you'll have a better impact from, doing it in Washington or somebody doing it in Sydney or London or Toronto or LA or wherever you happen to be. I'm not saying that, I got into trouble many, many years ago when I was encouraging repatriation. People were like, coming at me. But as long as you are patriotic, as long as you feel a sense of pride and you want to do something for your country, whether you do it from Yerevan or whether you do it from Tbilisi or, I don't know, Moscow or, as I said, Washington, it doesn't matter. I think if we want to be this global nation we keep talking about, it's that networked nation that we are. It's about helping each other and working toward a common goal, which is the empowerment of the homeland. Because if the homeland isn't empowered, we cannot survive in the neighborhood that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, that's very true. And just shifting gears a little bit, you worked in Canada and then you moved to Armenia. You started working in Armenia with Armenians. What has been different for you working in Canada? And obviously, there are going to be pros and cons in both places, right? But what was this major difference that was
Oh,
shocking for you?
it's still shocking to me. Look, I grew up, I'm of the generation that was the latchkey generation, right? My parents worked, we were very independent. We did everything ourselves. Nobody talked about anxiety or OCD or ADD or ADHD or every kind of that you can imagine. So if we had a problem, we had to fix it. Our parents
Yeah.
didn't coddle us. When we fell, they didn't say, bye, let me help you. They're like, why did you fall?
Right.
I remember after a bicycling accident and I was scraped up all over the place. And I came home thinking that my mother was going to, say, bye, achchigas, what happened? And it was like, I got yelled at. So I come from a generation where we had to be really tough and take care of ourselves. And if we had a problem, we fixed it. So that's one thing. So it's a generational thing. And then I come from a country that had a very strong work ethic. at least when I was in Canada, right? We worked, from early in the morning till late at night. And if we had to continue working, we would, and nobody was saying, oh, bye again, right? So then I come to Armenia, and it's 8 o'clock in the morning or 9 o'clock in the morning. There are no cars out. People get to work at 11 or 10. Then they have to have their coffee, and then the fruit has to be sliced and placed, and people are talking. And I couldn't understand this kind of, I don't know what the word is, ineffective, inefficient working environment. Now, it has changed, not to North American standards, I would argue.
Yeah.
So that was my big, I mean, there was such a huge cultural shock at every turn, whether it was just from human relations to work ethic. So I still have issues. People come and say, oh, I have anxiety. And I say, yeah, okay, so do I. Let's just, there's work that needs to be done. And we didn't have labels for everything.
Right.
Again, that's a very generational thing. And I'm not trying to be um, indifferent or insensitive to, people's self-perception of what they have. I'm just saying that I come from a generation where we just, kept our head down and we worked. Nobody said, you need a mental health day. And,
Yeah.
things have changed. So whether it's social media, whether it's, this huge flow of information that young people have difficulty dealing with, we didn't have social media, thank God, when I was growing up.
Yeah.
We didn't have the internet when I was growing up. So it's a different thing. Yeah, but that was the big thing for me is the attitude toward work. I think
Yeah.
that was quite difficult for me at first.
Just to talk about those the labeling and this generational difference, I think I think those are two extremes, right? Everything in moderation is probably where we need to land at. So
We know
probably
moderation. We don't know how
the
to, we're very extreme in everything that we do. Yeah.
That's true. That's very true. So, but if you're working hard and you're not even acknowledging the feelings that you have, the anxiety that you have, then you might actually, it might affect your health, right? So it's probably not as healthy. And then what we have right now is the complete opposite extreme, which is like every single emotion, every single issue that a person has is labeled, is talked about, and then we are just drowning in the sea of labels. And I have anxiety, OCD, and then I can't do this, I can't do that. And I think those are two extremes, and we need to hopefully at some point we will get to the middle, the golden
Sure.
golden middle of it. Do you agree with that?
No, certainly, certainly. I mean, nobody took the time to ask us how we were feeling about anything.
Yeah,
So a lot of, there are a lot of suppressed feelings. We don't share oftentimes how we
right.
feel because we just were never given the tools to do that. So
Mhm.
absolutely, it's always about that golden median, finding that path that allows you to deal with your own emotions,
Mhm.
but also not drown in them, you know?
Yeah, exactly. So I want to talk a little bit about the moment when you realize that you need to start EVN Report. So every entrepreneur goes through this process when this kind of there's a moment in their life when they have this sense of clarity that they know this is exactly what I need to do. They don't know how they're going to do it, but they have this certain kind of manna from heaven. They have sense of belief that they can absolutely do it, and then this vision that this is what I need to do, this is what I need to go towards, and they just go for it. Can you talk about this moment where this was clear for you and how did this manifest in your life?
I was talking to somebody the other day, and I was reminding him how when I first started on this journey, I had a tunnel vision. Nobody could sway me from that decision. Look, it really started with the 4-Day War in April of 2016. I had left my previous job. I was teaching at the American University. And then the 4-Day War broke out. And, if you're a journalist, you always want to be in the middle of the conflict. You run toward conflict, you don't run away from it. And I felt like powerless almost because, I wanted to communicate with the world of what was happening. And I realized that we were doing everything in Armenian and we weren't communicating. We suck at strategic communications in general.
That's
Okay.
true.
So I just started using my social media platforms. I was translating everything that was coming out of the Ministry of Defense. I had a blog, and I was just writing. And at that time, global networks were looking for English speakers. So they found me through Twitter, and so I was on Al Jazeera, I was on BBC, and I was just talking about what was happening. So so that was the first click in my brain that why don't we have an English language platform in Armenia, a news platform, right? In the post-Soviet space, you had, the Kiev Post, you had the Moscow Times, all of the post-Soviets, not all of them, but some of them had English language news platforms. And I'm thinking, why don't we have one? So that thing was sort of going on in my head. And then that summer, we had the takeover of the police station by the Sasnadzire, right? The armed group of men storming a police station, killing people in the process, taking hostages. And all of a sudden, there were thousands of people on the street supporting them. And it was like, this conflict in my brain. If this had happened in any other city, people wouldn't be supporting what was happening. And I felt like, okay, we're not digging deeper to try to understand what it is that's taking place. We're reporting on it, but we're not actually analyzing it. We're not digging deeper. We're not trying to get to the heart of what's happening. And if we don't understand what's happening, how do we then chart a path for the future? So I said, okay, I'm going to start it. Why can't I start it? And that's the beauty of Armenia, coming back to my earlier comment. Um, I could never have done this in Toronto. There's no way. Okay, I understand that, all of us here who do projects, we're big fish in a small bowl. It's possible to make change here. So I started talking to people and I said, look, I want to start an English language news platform. I have no money, I have no prospects. Would you join me? Would you be, a board member? Would you write for me? I don't have any money to pay you, but would you do it? But at that time, some people knew me because, I've been covering the news in Armenia since the early 2000s. And they said, yeah, we'll support you. And so I was, like I said, I had this tunnel vision. Nobody could sway me from this idea. And it never happened to me in my life before. Sure, I've done many things, but it was like a eureka moment. And I said, I'm going to do this. And I had people around me saying, but Maria, it's not going to work. It's English. There's no video, long form, in-depth articles. Nobody reads anymore. And I said, no, it's about supply and demand. What you supply is what with your supply, you can formulate a demand. If all we're giving is bullshit, excuse my language, and we're not giving the population, the citizens, the people of Armenia, if we're not giving them, and the diaspora, if we're not giving them contextualized, fact-checked news, then they're gonna, do you know what I'm saying? So I said, I believe it's gonna work because I put myself in the place of the reader. I was desperate to read analysis, desperate to read longer pieces to understand what are the forces and factors that are shaping our lives. We're not asking the right questions. So I put a pitch deck together. I didn't know what a pitch deck was. I put one together. I started, researching and just talking. I was incessantly talking. I think people were sick of me at that point. But I registered a foundation because I thought, okay, where am I going to get the money to do this?
Yeah.
I registered a foundation. I put together a board of directors for the foundation, amazing people who are still with me. I started it at the end of 2016. 2017 March, we launched and haven't looked back since. Now, knowing what I know now, would I have done it? I'm not sure. But it's like, I wake up every morning and I can't wait to get to the office. I live and I breathe it, and I believe in the work that we're doing. I believe whatever we do for the public record. People oftentimes say, who's going to read about electoral law, Maria? Is it really that sexy? And I said, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, if somebody wants to know what was happening in Armenia in 2018, 2019, 2020, whenever, there will be a public record of what was taking place in Armenia. And I'm not doing it because, I always tell the story, I have relatives who say, but do you make money? And I say, no, I don't. Barely make a salary. Then why are you doing it?
Yeah.
It's because I really feel so passionately and so strongly that we need to have a very healthy intellectual, and by intellectual, I don't mean elitist,
Right.
but an intellectual debate. We need to have critical discourse in the country instead of yelling and screaming at each other, instead of accusing each other. I say this everywhere. The words traitor and hero, we have absolutely denigrated those terms. We call everybody a traitor, or we call people a hero. Look, we're just human beings. We're trying to, get our shit done, and we're trying to figure out things. We want to know how to live. And if we don't have proper information, we won't know how to make decisions in our lives. So yeah, that was a long answer to your question.
No, I think you've hit so many points that were so valuable. One is, first of all, if we think about entrepreneurs who are starting out, so basically what you did is you identified a demand, a gap in the market that
Right.
existed and which other people probably didn't see. And then you created a product that you yourself would consume, which is the best thing an entrepreneur could do. Basically, you're crafting something that you are passionate about and that you need, and then you see that the market needs it. So I think this is the magic formula that entrepreneurs need to follow. Because if you are creating, if you're creating something that you yourself are not passionate about, a product for someone else who might be useful, but you're like, I wouldn't use it myself. I don't think you're going to put in the effort, the time, the emotion into the product and get the same result as if you were actually passionate about it.
Yeah, absolutely. But I was going to say, I didn't realize that it was a magic formula. I didn't
Mm.
realize it was almost as if I was in this fog almost, and I just
Mm.
knew that I had to do it. And when you asked me to be on the podcast, I thought, I'm not an entrepreneur. Why does she want me to be on the podcast? I don't see myself as an entrepreneur.
Yes, you
In my
are.
head, an entrepreneur is somebody who actually makes money at some point, but that's a
I'm sure you'll
social.
get there.
But it's, starting something is really, it is magical. It is a lot of hard work, a lot of hard work. And a lot of sometimes, I'm not a person, I'm not filled with self-doubt. I
Mhm.
don't have those issues oftentimes. And sometimes you doubt yourself, was this the right decision? Was this the right way to do it? But I would say that's about, 5% of the time that goes on in my head. But most of the time I'm really focused and
Mhm.
actually very proud of the work that we do. It might not be for everybody, and it isn't.
And it
It's
shouldn't
not.
be for everyone.
And people will say, "Oh, I was in London once, and Armenian student associations from different universities had put together an event, and they asked, and it was after the revolution, and so they asked if I would go and talk about EVN and what had just taken place in the country, and somebody got up and said, but you're very elitist." I thought, well, am I? I mean, just because we want to do something that's thoughtful, something that makes people think and forces them to read, if that's elitist, then okay, then maybe we are. But
Yeah.
I want to take EVN report to a level that it can compete with any English language publication in the world. I'm really tired of mediocrity. I'm tired of, working on a volunteer basis because it's Armenia, it's an Armenian thing, it's okay. No, those days are over. We
Yeah.
are now in a situation where we cannot afford to be mediocre in any sphere. I don't care whether it's in defense, education, healthcare, whatever it happens to be, we cannot be mediocre. Our lives, our experience has taught us that when we are,
Yeah.
we get beaten down. And so, I know nothing about defense. I don't know anything about healthcare. What I know is this, and I'm going to try to do the best that I can. Are we
Mhm.
always successful? No. Have we screwed up? Certainly. Are we going to screw up? Probably. But we
Absolutely.
learn absolutely, that's a given. Um, but as long as we learn from the process, and look, when you're creating something, you have to institutionalize it.
Mhm.
And we're on that path. I mean, we're only 7 years old. We're going to be eight this coming eight. I talk like a child. Um, 7 years of operations, and look at everything that the country has been through: a
Yeah.
revolution, instability, a war, instability, protest, domestic instability, ethnic cleansing. It's mind-boggling when you think about how many lifetimes we've lived in the last 6, 7 years.
Yeah. Again, I think you mentioned so many things, and I really want to dig into a couple of these things again. So one, you mentioned that it's important not to do something for free and volunteer. And I agree so much with it. Yes, you can start something for a good cause. Yes, absolutely. For a certain period of time, you can do something for free. And most entrepreneurs do things for free in the beginning because they don't make money, but they believe in their product. And I think that it's important because it's not sustainable if you rely on a model that's, you know, just just to do something for the sake of doing something versus doing something for the sake of creating value. And when you create value, you usually tap into the money. And obviously, it's going to take time until you get to a model that works for you. But I think it's a very important point for entrepreneurs to understand that if you're not earning money, then you need to really think about the value that you're creating and the business model.
Well, because look, passion will take you only so far,
Yeah.
right? Whether we like it or not, financial incentives are very, very important. So I wasn't
Yeah.
paying myself at the beginning until,
Mhm.
the board came to me and said, this is not a tenable situation. You cannot not be paid for the work that you're putting in. Luckily, we found a model. It's not a sustainable model. When you're a nonprofit, funding is always going to be a problem.
Yeah.
Um, but coming back to this, volunteering or not, if you want excellence, you have to pay for it.
Yeah.
That's that's just the way the world works. So if I want, or if I drive a journalist or an author of a piece crazy because I'm going back and forth with them on, where's, you're saying this, source it to the original. Give me a link to the original source. Where did you get this information? You're making these proclamations. Can you back it up? Can you not back it up? All of these things are important. So when I'm demanding a certain level, I have to pay for it. There are people who will write articles for me and they'll say, I don't want any money for it. The process itself was amazing. But, if you want to build a media organization, you have to pay people to do the work. And it's interesting, people oftentimes think, they should be able to go to the New York Times website or the Washington Post or whatever it is and get news for free. But somebody has to pay for that, right? There is a
Yeah.
reporter who's actually, on the beat, who's talking to people, who's working as a reporter. The war, we had a crew out during the war. These people were putting their lives on the line every single day. Should they not
Yeah.
get paid for it? Of course they should get paid for it. When somebody, spends weeks researching a piece of, for an article, should they not get paid for their time? Of course they should. Same way we pay a teacher, a politician, a truck driver, a fireman, anything. But for some reason, when it comes to media, people think, oh, well, it's online. Why should I pay for it?
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Another point that you mentioned is having a tunnel vision in the beginning as you're starting out, right? Something that I've always been dabbling with and thinking about. I have a degree in innovation and entrepreneurship, and if you read literature on entrepreneurship, you will hear people say like, you need to be agile, you need to make sure that you're open-minded, especially when you're starting out and like thinking about products and pivoting and thinking about the market demand. And that's all correct and good. But then on practical level, when I talk to entrepreneurs, that is actually not the case. Most of the startups, how they started out at least, right? So, do you think that having a tunnel vision at the beginning of your journey has helped you or maybe kind of limited you in certain ways?
If I didn't have that tunnel vision, I wouldn't have been able to start.
Mhm.
It was an absolute, there was no, I mean, I'm trying to think back. Was I not flexible? I can't, I just know that I had this idea in my head and I was going to do everything I could to make it happen,
Mhm.
even knowing that I didn't have the resources to do it. But, listen, in any kind of business, in any kind of entrepreneurship that you do, in any work that you do, if you're not flexible, agile, if you can't, shift course when necessary, you'll break. But
Yeah.
in the beginning, I don't know that I was that flexible, to be honest. I was focused in a way that
Yeah.
I'd never been before.
I love that. It's it's really inspiring for me to hear that, because it's so important for entrepreneurs starting out to understand that this, when they have this vision, the idea, it might change in the future, but they have to pursue it. They have, at least that's the beginning vision that they have. They have to follow this path, and then obviously things will open up and they will see more things that are hidden from them right now.
Look, we've experimented and dabbled in different things, and we've started one thing and we saw it didn't work, and we, like I said, shifted course. But that's all par for the course. I mean, you just do that because you have to. But I love the ability or the freedom that I have to do that, to say, okay, I'm going to try this, for example, and if it works, great. If not, it's not the end of the world. We'll try something else. But it's always very important to stay true to the core mission. Sorry, over the years, people have told me, oh, you need to do more video, and all of this. And even if we do decide to do that, for example, and we've done some video products, the core mission for me is thoughtful, researched commentary and analysis. This for me is the core of what EVN is. And then everything else should revolve around that. So even if we do video, it has to mirror part of the core mission. And I always say, and I don't mind saying it, and I know it's a big statement, but I really believe that, I do want to be the New Yorker of the Caucasus. I want to be of that level. Will I ever be able to do that? I'm not 100% sure, but I'm certainly going to work my tail off to make sure that I am. That, of course, we work miracles in Armenia. Let me tell you a story. So when I first moved, I was working for the National Chamber Orchestra of Armenia. I am not a musician.
Wow.
But I was helping the maestro with development. So yeah, fundraising, developing new products. And there was a visiting musician who was going to play with the orchestra. And she came up to me afterward and she goes, I'm just astounded at the quality of music that these musicians are able to produce from the very poor quality instruments that they have. And you might think, you might be very proud of it, but I mean, it's devastating. But when I think of what we do with the very small and limited resources, both human and material that we have, we work miracles. Not only me or EVN Report, many organizations, many startups, many institutions are working miracles with the very limited amount of resources that we have. And that's driven by our passion and maybe a little bit by our patriotism, because we want to make things better for the country in which we live. So I talked.
No, I love it. On that note, and you mentioned this before as well, you said you hate mediocrity. And you cannot stand it, at least at this stage of your career, right? But when you were starting out, or actually when any entrepreneur is starting out, or anyone who's starting any creative endeavor as well, they have to start with very super limited resources in both human and financial. And so they end up with products that might not necessarily be the best quality, right? So can you tell me the story of when you were starting out? Were you able to produce high quality content? Was it, or how did you deal with that, being the perfectionist that you are?
No, when I look back, I kind of cringe at some of the things we did. But listen, we've got to be innovative, I guess. So, for example, we wanted to do a weekly news podcast. Rubilan Margosyan, who is the managing editor, who started with me right from the very beginning, she and I said, okay, let's do a podcast. Let's be the first in Armenia to do podcasts. Well, we didn't have podcasting equipment. We didn't know how to do audio editing, video edit, nothing. So we used our iPhones, and it's a joke. It's a running joke now. So we would record the podcast, well, whatever, we would record on our phones. And if we made a mistake, we'd go back to the beginning and start again because we didn't know how to edit. And then, we were doing it in our homes. I had an office at AUA. Thank God AUA, we were using my office at AUA. Or like in Rubina's house, she had a dog and a cat, and the dog would bark and the cat would jump on the table. Then we'd have to start again, and there would be too much of an, I mean, it was just ridiculous, right? But we wanted to do it. Or one time we were in an office and there were these bean bags, and we put the bean bags around us, and we were doing the podcast recording on our phones. So yeah, it was not good quality. We didn't know what the hell we were doing, but we knew we had to do it. And so yeah, the quality wasn't good. But we really strove to when we are now at a point where we will receive many pitches for articles and I will decline them sometimes because, I'll say, we're not a community paper. We are a magazine, an online magazine,
Yeah.
doing long form journalism. We are not going to publish just anything anymore. So we are in a position now that we're very picky. Um, we have some internal mechanisms that we've put into place to fact check. One article sometimes goes through 5 hands. People don't believe it. Like if it'll come in Armenian, it'll go to the Armenian language editor, and then the managing editor will look at it. They'll make adjustments or whatever. They'll send it back to the author. It'll come back. Then we send it for translation. And then it comes back from translation. Then it's copy edited. And then I get the final sort of version, and then I look at it, and then I find holes in it, and then I send it back to the. So it's a back and forth process. I think I should do a video on the story of one article, like what it takes for one article to be published. And it's very rare that we get an article that's perfect and good to go. Everything is a process.
Yeah.
So right now, I can say that we are not mediocre, on the contrary. But yeah, in the beginning, you got to take the hits sometimes. You have no choice, especially when you don't have the resources. But now we do. We do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wanted to highlight this because a lot of the times when we're starting out, we want it to be perfect. And it precludes us from actually taking this leap and starting something. So for me, if we're talking about the podcast, I know it's not perfect. It's far from perfect. I know I have a lot to invest in this, but if I don't do this now, I will never do it because you need to get started to then add resources. And then when you create value, you will actually tap into some source where you can create better content of the vision. But I do also cringe at some of the things that I do because I feel like I could have done so much better. There's so many details that could be better, but it's
Oh,
just, it is what
absolutely.
it
Oh,
is.
come on. I still, when I hear my voice, when I listen to a podcast, when I'm going to watch this interview, I'm going to cringe probably. Why did I say that? How did I say that? But I think, I think the important thing is persistence and consistency. Consistency is huge for me. I mean, if you're not consistent, people are going to not, figure you out. So, right now, for example, we follow the Associated Press style book because I always feel very strongly that consistency is important. So if you're going to call the 2020 war the 2020 Artsakh war, you're going to call it the second Nagorno-Karabakh, whatever it is, stick to it and stay consistent with it so that the reader isn't confused about what you're doing. Right now, what we're doing is we're developing an Armenian language style book, and we're an English language publication. We happen to have an Armenian section after there was a demand by our readers saying, you're doing all of this amazing content. Yes, you're reaching who you want to reach, but you should also be reaching people in Armenia. So we started an Armenian language section. So now with our Armenian language editor and with the managing editor, Rubina, we're putting together a style book in Armenian so that there's consistency in the language as well, in journalistic writing, something that we don't have at the moment. So, we're trying to be innovative and we're experimenting with different things, but it's all in the in the objective of elevating the quality of journalism in Armenia.
So as you're speaking, I can't figure it out. Are you a big picture person or are you a detail oriented person or are you both? I'm not
I'm
sure.
not sure. I'm not sure. Um, I'm focused on the details
Yeah.
to the point of, annoyance, probably. I never saw myself as a big picture person. Um, I think with age and experience and life, I have I'm developing the ability. I don't know that it's innate for me to have a big picture view, like an eagle's eye view of things. But I've also learned that whatever isn't innate, it's always possible to develop. So I
Interesting.
work on myself. I read a lot, even though reading is my job. But I read, industry practices. Now we have AI. So should we have an AI policy for our journalists, for our writers? These are issues that I'm constantly reading and learning about. And I think that one of one of the measures of success for anybody is the ability to know that you don't know enough and that you constantly have to learn. You know, Sometimes I'll see 20-year-olds coming in and saying, I want to write an opinion piece. And I'll say, come back when you're 30, right? Not to be ageist, but it's also, I mean, if you have something to say, certainly, I agree. But at the same time, life experience, learning, constantly learning, is so important. If we don't look, life has changed, especially in media. There's things
Yeah.
that are constantly in flux, in motion, and you have to keep up with so many things to understand. Social media, I hate social media with a passion, but I also understand that it's so important for our
Yeah.
product. We had again another aha moment a couple of weeks ago where we thought, why isn't our product getting more play on Facebook? Why is it now all on Instagram? What's happening with Twitter? And you realize that your product on your website is almost like a dumping ground, and it really lives on social media because it's through social media that people are coming and
Yeah.
engaging with the materials. So things are changing. Algorithms change. There was Snapchat, now TikTok. So you're constantly having to learn how to disseminate, how to distribute your content. So it's not good enough anymore just to produce it. Now you have to sell it in a way that you didn't have to before. So
Yeah.
constant learning
Yeah,
is a
for sure. For sure. And if you look back to when you were starting out versus now, what are some of the qualities that you had to develop, that you absolutely had to develop so that you can continue doing a good job at this and leading essentially a team?
patience, not to be passive aggressive, which I have a tendency to do.
Really interesting.
Yes,
I would
definitely.
never say that.
Oh, yes, big time. I'm really good at suppressing emotion. Remember that generation that was never allowed to be in
Right,
confrontation
that
question.
that I can imagine. But
Yes,
you being
I
passive
have learned.
aggressive, not so much.
So there's been a lot of self-awareness. I've
Hmm.
learned that it's okay to say no.
Hmm.
I've learned to let go of certain things, like delegate more. I'm not territorial, but as I said, you know, passive aggressiveness is way down there now. It's good.
That's great. I think why I'm asking this, it's so interesting when you start leading a team, when you have a team that relies on you, and then you have audience that relies on you to produce content, you take on this responsibility and something shifts in you. You're essentially becoming a different person because now you're not just responsible for yourself and for your kids and for your family, but you also have this other outlet and your world changes. And so now you have to change yourself on the inside so that you can operate on the way that's going to be covering all of these people who are relying on you.
I also rely on them, to be
Mhm.
honest. Certainly, I don't know that I would hope that nobody has to rely on anybody, that everybody's there because they love their job and they're getting compensated for the work that they're doing. We would
Mhm.
not be able to do what we do if we didn't have the team that we have, if we
Mhm.
hadn't been able to nurture the people that we have, and if we had not been able to communicate. Over the last 7 years, we've worked with over 300 writers. So we commission most of our articles, right? We don't have that many staff writers. So we've learned how to deal with many different personalities. I've
Yeah.
learned how to allow people to have their distinct voice. So we
Mhm.
don't copy edit to the point where it's all robotic and it all sounds the same. Somebody who's a French Armenian writes in a certain way. Somebody who's from America writes in a certain way. Somebody from Armenia writes in a different way. And I've had to learn how to, and it's been very important for me to allow everybody to have their distinct voice in terms of
Mhm.
writing style and also in terms of what they want to say. Look, a multiplicity of these voices is so important for the discourse, right? I don't agree with everything that we publish. I will never agree with everything that we publish.
Mhm.
But I also feel that it's important for people to say and to have an opinion, as long as it's based on facts and based on, rational thinking. And it's just not, I woke up one day and I think that the sun is blue.
Yeah.
So that's what I've had to learn. I've had to learn how to be more flexible,
Mhm.
but learning how to say no has been the biggest lesson for me.
Mhm.
I've always
Mhm.
had trouble with that, hence the passive aggressiveness.
It's so interesting. And also, as you were speaking, I was thinking about Armenians and how opinionated we are in general.
Sure.
And our opinions not always are based on facts. They're sometimes based on someone said something 10 years
Sure.
ago, we heard it affected us in a certain way, and then now we're under this perception that that's true, and we build our life on this incorrect perception. So what I'm thinking right now is that your job is basically educating an entire, not just one, but generations to rely not on someone said something or I heard this from this neighbor and that's absolute truth. They have someone higher up and they said it, but to actually do an analysis themselves and go through multiple layers of information.
Look, it's really difficult to be a media consumer today.
Yeah.
It's even more difficult to be a media consumer in a society that has not had reliable, credible information always, that is always under constant threat, that doesn't feel safe and secure, and believes wholeheartedly in conspiracy theories, right? So,
Yeah.
so we're dealing with a society that has been traumatized,
Oh,
continually
yeah.
traumatized, continually. Just think about, again, just to go back to, when I first moved and I looked at the resilience of people, because we underestimate ourselves oftentimes and we love to complain all the time. But just think about everything that this nation has been through.
Oh,
And
yeah.
since 1988, the movement starts, the earthquake, right? The war, in the middle of that, independence, energy crisis, blockade, the dark years. Just
Yeah.
like it's just been one constant trauma after another. And these are layers that are quite deep. And the fact that we're surviving is a testament to our resilience. I think we need to give ourselves a little bit more credit.
Hmm.
But having said that, when you live in a society that is quite polarized, of forces, external and internal, that are, screwing with people's sort of perceptions, like you said, of the world, it's really hard to rise above that din when people love, Lura right? Like this kind of breaking news and
Shocking.
shocking. We love shocking stuff. And
Yeah.
so it's really difficult to push a product when everything is glittery and pink. And do you know what I'm saying? So it's really difficult for us. On the other hand, it's really difficult for the person who's trying to understand what's going on, right?
Yeah.
Who do you trust? You're constantly having to cross-reference to make sure that the news you read is actually the news that actually happened. And then on top of that, it's the Kavor Sanik situation. Well, my mother's neighbor's godfather told, this person, therefore it is the truth. Now, that's true for the older generation. The younger generation is much more savvy. Having said that, the younger generation is also exhausted and
Yeah.
fatigued
Oh, yeah.
from, and
Information overload.
it's that is our fault.
Mm.
I really believe that my generation has screwed it up for the younger generation because we have not acted like responsible adults. We have not been the adults in the room. We have given into conspiracies, we have given into, emotions. We don't know how to be rational and strategic. And,
Mm.
the young people are just saying, I just want to live my life. I don't want to hear all of the cacophony of, BS that you guys are forcing down our throats. So I want to be the adult in the room. You know, I want to be able to say, look, you can read this article and understand what's happening, in Davos, for example, or you can read this and understand what's happening, um, you know, Armenia vis-a-vis Russia, for example. But of course, our topics are very heavy and very geopolitical, and that's also a turnoff for people. So, but it's the reality. Unfortunately, we carry the burden of being in a country, in a region where we are going to be in constant conflict. And if we don't know what our neighbors are doing, if we don't understand what we're doing, how do we make decisions in our lives and how do we live?
Yeah.
Um, we don't have the luxury of, living in la la land. It is not la la land here. It's
Yeah.
the really gritty, dirty, nasty, messy world. Um,
It
but
is.
the other time, like I said, I think one of the things that has been sort of a guiding light in my life as a journalist is, yes, you can talk about all the bad things. You can talk
Mhm.
about the corruption and whatever you want to talk about. But if you don't leave a little bit of hope at the end,
Mhm.
you need to inspire people. You need to be a little hopeful. And people will say, you're naive or, you're irresponsible. Look at the position we're in the world. I understand that, but you can't be constantly forcing, really bad and threatening news down people's throats because there's a lot of good things that are happening in Armenia too. A lot
Mhm.
of great things. And we have a bright, beautiful generation that wants to breathe and live. So part of my job as an editor, as a journalist, is also to try and, show the good things as well.
Yeah. And I can safely say on behalf of the millennial generation that you're definitely the adult that we want to look up to and that we trust. So it's definitely safe to say that. Um, what is the next big milestone for EVN Report?
Everybody keeps asking me that. They're saying,
Yeah.
what does EVN Report want to be when it grows up?
Yeah.
Um, I want us to continue. Look, anytime that I feel like we are plateauing, I panic, which means that
Mm.
I don't like normalcy. If I like normalcy, I would have stayed in Canada, right? Um, uh, we do an annual media festival that has now become part of the festival circuit in the country, and I'm very, very, very happy and proud of the work that we've done. We've brought, over 30 of some of the best journalists from around the world to Armenia. We've done exhibitions and workshops and portfolio reviews, and we've had these panel discussions about important things that are happening. And the readership comes out, the community comes out, and I really want people to understand that it is possible to do responsible journalism,
Mm.
solutions-based journalism in Armenia. It's not easy, certainly, and you will come under attack for many different things. But so the festival is one thing that I want to keep going and do every single year, and we will. The other
When is
thing
it
that
this year? Sorry.
it's May 29 to June
Mhm.
2 or June 1.
Mhm.
Don't quote me. It's end of May.
Okay.
We've already booked the hall. We're now in discussions with different journalists, and we're trying to figure out what kind of program we're going to put together for this upcoming 2025 festival. I do want to expand the demographic, and
Mhm.
therefore we are going to be launching a new section that will look at everything from fashion design to urban culture to food and cuisine and restaurant reviews.
Nice.
Do it in EVN style, but a little bit lighter fare. And again, like I said, there are so many cool things happening that the diaspora doesn't know about.
Yeah.
And I want to be able to show them that there is that, and that was, that was one of the first things in my head is I was so tired of the negativity that I want people to see Armenia as a place of potential, despite everything that we've been through and that we still have to overcome. Building resilience, building a stronger country is the only way we're going to survive. If everybody does their part in elevating us, then we will get there. So those are the, and we also thinking about doing different podcasts, so we can talk about that off the record later. So yeah, we're constantly experimenting with different formats, expanding and diversifying the content to bring, I want to bring more, although our readership is quite young as well, I want the younger generation to feel like there's a place where they can go and they can read about Fashion Week that's coming up in November, or read about, the underground music culture that's happening, or anything from tattooing to, plastic surgery. It's fantastic.
Nice.
There's a plethora of topics that we can talk about, and I'm really proud because we've done topics that cover menopause. I don't think there's an Armenian publication in the world that has ever written an article about menopause, or
Yeah.
sex education for women with disabilities, or
Yeah. Wow.
trafficking, and all of these things. So we try to cover the spectrum of the human experience because we are human. We forget that as Armenians, we only have to do one thing, but we experience everything as human beings,
Yeah.
don't we? So why not talk about those things?
Yeah.
And I hope that we'll do more and more interesting topics like that.
Yeah, I love that. I wish growing up you were there and topics like sex education, menopause, all of that was discussed, and we had a place we could refer to because when I was growing up in Yerevan, in Armenia, that was not the case. Those were things you could not talk about. And we had internet, but you couldn't really surf it as much. So I'm glad you're doing this for the generations to come in an objective way.
Absolutely, and we shouldn't be afraid to talk about these things, about
Oh yeah.
relationships, and it's like amot. Everything is shameful for us. We're not allowed to talk about these things. I remember we published an article several years ago about sexual violence against children.
Right.
There was a national report that was put out, and then UNICEF had brought in international experts, and you should have seen the hate mail we received from
Mm.
people saying, why are you airing our dirty laundry? Why are you talking? I come to Armenia every year with my children, and Yerevan is a very safe city. It is a very safe city. I've raised my children here. I'm raising grandchildren here. I know it's a very safe city. But to say that we don't have sexual violence against children, that we don't have abuse in the homes, this is irresponsible. I'm not saying, be a crazy fanatic about it, but if we don't talk about these issues,
Mhm.
right, who's going to be talking about it? The cycle will perpetuate itself, and we
Yeah.
need to have the courage and the courage to know that we're going to receive hate mail for it. And I remember the journalist who wrote it. She came to me saying, "Ms. Titizian," I said, "Don't worry, you did a good job. We checked all of our facts. We just reported on what the report was saying."
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's
Thank
it's
you so much, Maria. I think it's this was one of the most inspiring interviews I had in a while, and I appreciate you grounding us with facts and information, but also lifting us with the inspiration and the hope. And I think having this balance between being on the ground and standing firmly, but also having your heads up high and just looking forward with pride and knowing that you have all the strength you need to move forward. I think that's a very good balance for a journalist to provide to us. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Lucy. This has been a really fun conversation, fun and difficult, I would say, because we don't always talk about the good things. But thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you.